The Summer Birds by Penelope Farmer, Part 2, 3. Miss Halibut's discovery of their secret was really the saving of it, for Jammy Hat, out of shame, became the best keeper of the secret from parents instead of the worst. It made all of them more careful, but him it turned into a clam. It also meant that school hours, when they gathered together in the sight of a grown-up, were not the continual difficulty they might have been had they still considered Miss Halibut an enemy, liable as parents to disapprove. On the other hand, under her watchful eye, they could not spend the remaining months of the school term skipping homework to go flying or trying some of the wilder expeditions they had planned. These would have to wait until the term had ended and Miss Halibut had returned to her home in the suburbs. Thus, most of the rest of June and nearly the whole of July they spent learning to fly better, finding out how to do things like flying backwards or turning swiftly in midair, and in discovering their own special skill in flight or lack of it. They all flew very differently, some much more skillfully than others. The boy and Maggot alone were wholly bird-like. Jointless creatures of the air. The boy eagle-like, Maggot more graceful, a swift perhaps, or a martin. Of the others, Marley and Bandy were best in a gymnastic way. They were easy and fearless, but somehow angular, lazy as rooks, without the grace of swallows. Toddy Feather darted as eager as a wagtail, and Ginger Apple was no bird at all. His flight all bulk and hard work like his football, but he was strong enough to last longer than most, and to look more dangerous in the air. Annie Feather flew slowly, heavily, dully, yet she was sound, much sounder than Molly Scobb, who tried to imitate Maggot Hobbin, but quite without success, continually entangling herself in branches and losing her hair ribbon or landing herself in gorse bushes and bursting into tears. Emma Makepeace was much more stoical. She flew fast and fearless, but choppily, so that she quickly tired, and her landings were not graceful. Scooter Dimple, who tried to be as fearless as his hero Bandy, was apt as Molly Scobb to get into tangles, though he remained cheerful. Worst of all flyers was Baby Fumpkins. He could only fly short distances without having to rest, and when teased about it, was inclined to sulk. The others called him Jemima Puddle Duck, because that was how he flew. As for Jammy Hat, being so young and so small, flying came as naturally to him as walking. He flew just as he walked and swam, sticking his bottom out, wriggling between people, trying tricks and turns all the time, which dropped him on the ground. It was Jammy who had the idea of using frog flippers in the air. "You can swim faster with them, why not fly?" he shouted suddenly, and he was right and clever. There was a kick and a push in the frog feet, which sent all of them skimming more swiftly through the air with the speed of champions. Even the boy was better with them. Kicking his feet fiercely, he could move long distances, motionless as a diver, but curving upward to heat of sky, not downward to cool water. And they made Charlotte feel that she too was flying, not struggling wearily as so often it seemed when skill was gone. In reality, she was not a bad flyer. She flew cautiously, yet with an elegance that she did not know she possessed. The boy said to her one day, "You look nice flying, Charlotte," which made her blush with pleasure and start to say thank you, only to find that he had gone again, darting far on ahead with Maggot Hobbin. It was the third Saturday in July, that day, and a great day for them, for it was their first expedition together flying. The one expedition they made while it was still term time. It had been a scalding week, so hot that the classroom, all its windows open, cooked tempers slowly to simmering. On Friday afternoon, Miss Halibut had surveyed the school searchingly through her spectacles before dismissing them on the dot of 4 o'clock as usual, but she had not given them any homework, and she beckoned the boy back with an authoritative finger. Had she forgotten their work? The children wondered as they gathered their books together, hastening to escape in case it was only a mistake. They scuttled from the classroom into the schoolyard before she might remember, though not without curious glances at the boy smiling a smile that was wild and beaky as Miss Halibut talked into his listening ear. In a moment, He followed them into the yard and, still smiling, beckoned them through the high iron gates into the meadow on the other side of the railings where the chestnuts stood. "She says we're to go tomorrow. Somewhere cool," he had said, "and not to overexert ourselves or alarm your parents." "We can go," he sang out gaily, lively as sunlight with pleasure. "Where shall we go? I, you, all of us." So they reflected and decided with little argument to go to the lake, their favorite place, where sometimes they went to play. It stood in a parkland that once had surrounded a house long vanished, but for a few scattered bricks and cracked concrete flooring. The lake itself, a little way away, was wild and overgrown, birdful and rush-fringed. There was a small temple overlooking its water, and the children loved it, though it was too far away to visit often, and they usually only went in the school holidays when they could spend a whole day there at a time. Flying, they would arrive more quickly, and so they planned their day, tempers forgotten in the thought of freedom. Charlotte pretended confidence, but she desperately feared they should not be allowed a whole day from home. It was not a thing they had ever asked before. Emma said grandly that she would go anyway, whatever anyone said, but Charlotte was frightened that, if this happened, their chance of flying with the others would be spoiled for the whole summer. However, she said nothing to anyone, and when she tentatively asked Miss Gosling, in her most tactful voice, if they might go, she was surprised by the enthusiasm with which Miss Gosling said, "Of course, dears, if your grandpa allows it," for Miss Gosling, idle, saw a lazy day ahead. As for Grandfather Elijah himself, he was absent-minded these days, reading astrology in his study. He shouted at Emma's manners at tea time, but he only said again, "Will the peacock child be there?" And on hearing that she would, he said, "Of course, granddaughters. Shall Miss Gosling give you luncheon?" and retired, as usual, to his study. The others, too, had found permission easy. Baby Fumpkins, to all their surprise, had defied his anxious mother to come, though in his defiance he blushed red at regular intervals all day and said doubtfully, "What will mother say?" Jammy and Scooter told their mothers that they would spend the day at each other's houses, which, living at opposite ends of the village, was not likely to be discovered. The rest of them were old enough or came from large enough families to make their mothers glad of a day's peace, asking no dangerous questions. So they gathered early on the downs, some with, some without picnics, and flew to the lake over fields and a small wood, and thence to smooth parkland, where a delicate stepping deer herd snuffled into air below them, soft eyes wide too, surprised at humans who flew over their heads, to disappear smoothly, leaping into the distance, or to melt their dappled shadows into the trees, as they usually did when disturbed. The boy called out to them, and they relaxed, their slow eyes curious as they watched the school fly by. And suddenly, below them was the lake. In excitement, Jammy forgot to hold himself in flight and plummeted out of the air, to land splash in the water, his round face opened wide in surprise, eyes, mouth gaping. "It's lovely," he said as he came up, spluttering, not minding their laughter. "It's smashing honest. Let's all swim. But I can swim faster than you." And he grabbed at Scooter's dangling leg and pulled him down into the water, too, shouting with laughter. The rest of them said, "Babies," in a superior way, and landed sedately on the bank. But the sun was very hot, and the water looked cool in the rushless pool in the center. They had all brought bathing suits with them, so except for Molly and Baby, who could not swim, they threw off their clothes and fell into the lake impatiently. Sadly, it turned out more muddy than deep. The mud rose in squirts around their toes, and ducks and moorhens scattered frightened into the weeds. Charlotte swam very well, and she loved ducks and had watched them often on the village pond, diving for bread or skimming down into the water from the air. So it was she who tried tentatively to duckland, flying high from the bank and landing, legs outstretched and feet tight together, slanting upward like skis or the flippers of a flying boat. The first time she tried, she landed unevenly and fell sideways into the water, swallowing a mouthful of it. It tasted horribly of mud and weeds, and some went up her nose to make her splutter and cough. The next time, the same thing happened indeed. She fell harder, flat onto the water, and stung her face scarlet. She almost gave up trying, but suddenly she noticed the boy watching her and tried again, desperately refusing to fail before his mocking eyes. And this time it worked. She landed straight in a rush of water like a duck and slid to a sitting position. She looked triumphantly at the boy to prove herself. She did not speak to him yet. She went back to the land and tried the same thing again, and again it worked. "Look at me!" she cried out in pride, forgetting her reserve. "This is super!" And she did it again while they all watched. They were very impressed, and she was proud, but the boy was laughing at her. She was suddenly embarrassed at her display and blushed bright pink. "Why are you doing that?" the boy asked teasingly, snatching at an insect. "Does it seem a bit boasting?" she asked doubtfully, feeling the red mount in her face. "And why not?" he asked, eating the insect with enjoyment. "None of them thought of it. It was really quite clever of you," he added, darting off like a dragonfly to the other side of the lake. And that's the end of chapter 3.